Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be kind of revisiting Fawn as I have been able to test her more and uh, I've been able to test her more and in light of that testing there was actually a bug with how Fawn was interacting with spread. Uh, there was a bug with how Fawn was interacting with spread. She wasn't actually extending the duration of spread, even though the HUD was reflecting that. They just had a maintenance today, so they were able to fix that bug, and now spread kind of interacts differently as a result from what we initially tested. So there are some things to go over there. Not really much to further the evaluation of Fawn or if she's a must pull. I kind of still hold the same stance. If anything, I think, Fawn is just a super powerful broken unit. I think she definitely power creeps the buffer roll effectively. I still don't think she's the first thing you should pull, primarily because she's a Luminox banner. I do think that, if you did use your funds to get Minotaura instead, I think that was still a wiser investment in lieu of how powerful this new unit is, right? Okay, so now let's kind of go over some basic interactions with spread, right? Let's before we kind of get into it and get into the math, kind of get into some certain topics that I'm going to discuss today in regards to this. Let's kind of go over how spread works, right? So the very basic level, right? Spread is a debuff that is applied by uh, well, on global so far, there's only one combatant that applies spread, which is Luminous Star Poppy. And there are also Katos that can apply spread. Spread is a debuff that is placed on usually, well, in every case, one enemy at a time. And it causes, when you damage an enemy that has spread on it, a portion of the damage that that enemy takes, which is denoted by the percentage of the spread, will then be dealt to all other enemies on the battlefield. This excludes any enemies that were added that entered the battlefield after a spread was applied, although this, wave content isn't really something that's that applicable in this game to begin with. So in this example, right, Poppy applies a 35% spread onto the enemy target as long as that spread holds. If you damage the enemy afflicted with this 35 spread with an attack, then 35% of that damage is also going to be dealt to every other enemy on the battlefield. So let's say you're fighting 3 enemies and you use your Poppy ultimate to apply spread on the middle one, and then you use Asura's ultimate, and let's say Asura's ultimate does 1,000,000 damage, right, to the middle target. Then 350,000 damage, which is 35%, would be applied to the unit to the left, and 350,000 damage would be applied to the unit to the right, which means that Asura's ultimate would then deal 1.7 million damage, or that spread would give her a 70% increase in overall damage on her ultimate. Now, this sounds really broken, but the only caveat is spread really isn't something that lasts for too long, and it's definitely not something that's easy to reapply. So, in Poppy's case, the spread is only applied for one turn. Now, if you do get her to 3 stars, it will increase the spread duration to 2 turns. Between her and the Kato, 2 turns is pretty standard. With Poppy, in order to be able to reapply it, you have to fully charge her SP. She doesn't get an SP refund upon using her ultimate. I guess she gets 1 SP back after using her 5-star effect, I believe. But that's only for the first time, right? So you have to build her entire ultimate, which means you're devoting cards to a support, right, to get her ult. Or, your Kato, but your Kato recharges in every 4 turns, and the spread lasts for 2 turns, right? So you kind of run into a dilemma with uptime, which is why spread has been shaky at best until now, right? So as we know, Fawn has an ability that allows you to extend the duration of debuffs. This also works on Spread. We thought it worked with Spread initially when she released, but it turns out she was bugged. Even though on the enemy HUD, the Spread debuff was still appearing, the Spread wasn't actually applying. Well, after some further testing after today's update, now it seems to be properly prolonging Spread with some caveats, right? So what I have here is I have some footage from the training hub, right? So as you can see here, I've got Fawn, I've got her passive's not up, but I do have Fawn, I have Poppy. We already have 2 spreads applied here. If you note down here, I do have the Imp Cato, which means that, he is, that's another source of spread, right? Imp Cato is an active Cato that applies spread for 2 turns, similar to Poppy Ultimate. As you can see, I have 2 spreads here that I've been maintaining with Fawn. One of them is from Poppy, one of them is from the Imp Cato. So the first rule of spread: if you try to apply another spread from the same source onto an enemy, right? So let's say that, this guy, right? He has a Poppy spread and a Cato spread. So let's say I try to Poppy ult him again. Or let's say I try to use this Cato on him again, right? This will not create an additional instance of spread. It will instead refresh their spread. However, if you have 2 sources of spread, such as Poppy and a Cato, as you can see, both spreads can coexist on the enemy. So what do you do when you get additional spreads? Well, usually, if you have any access to AoE damage, you can actually apply them to another enemy, because then if you're dealing AoE damage and you're dealing damage to both enemies at the same time, then both spreads will activate, and we'll kind of get into that later. So basically, what happened in this video is I was just trying to find, various. I was recording some testing footage. I was trying to find how spread was interacting with various things. So as you can see here, we get the Cato set up. We do a Fawn ultimate. You notice I'm using the Cato on this because if we used it on the middle one, it would refresh the duration, right? Instead of adding another spread. Then we just do a Poppy buff for fun, and we have the Asura ultimate, and that Asura ultimate is targeted at the center unit. We are on ×1, so it's not going to go too fast. So first, of course, Cato is going to go off. We're going to apply that spread. You can see that spread on the unit on the right now. And now we are going to attack with our Fawn ultimate. Okay, so here are our numbers here. So as you will notice, right, we have our 3 instances of damage here, right? These yellow numbers, these crits, are the primary damage, that 246% that's being applied by your ultimate. Don't be confused by these blue numbers. It's also this number right here, you can tell, because it's 189145. This one just hasn't fully produced yet. So these 3 numbers here, that's actually going to be the accumulated healing value right here on our ultimate. So these 2 numbers are associated with the ultimate itself. So as we can see here, we have 3 additional numbers being dealt to the unit on the left, 1 additional number being dealt to the unit in the middle, and 2 additional numbers being dealt to the unit on the right. So with Fawn, right, her ultimate hits every target. So let's start with the guy in the middle, right? So when that 246337 hits the guy in the middle, right, what happens is both of these spreads, the Poppy spread and the Cato spread, are both going to proc, and it's going to push 2 damage numbers, 1 for each spread, to the unit to the left, which are 2 of these, and then it's going to push 2 numbers to the unit to the right, which are both of the numbers here, right? Then we have the unit to the right, which has 1 spread, and you know that there's also a yellow number hitting this one, right? So you have a spread here, which is going to and that spread is, pushing 1 number to the guy in the middle, that's this number here, and it's pushing one number to the guy to the left. So that's all three of the numbers, right? It picks up 2 from the 2 spreads here, and then 1 from the 1 spread here. And then the damage hits the guy on the left, and the guy on the left doesn't have any spreads, so there are no additional spreads that occur there. It's kind of complicated, but I'll try to explain it further, in a little bit here. So then, we have Asura ulting. This one's a bit more simple, right? Oh, almost had a good spot there. Hold on. Okay, that's good enough. So as you can see here, the ultimate by itself would have dealt 936,705 damage, right? We have 2 spreads on the middle enemy. That means we're going to get 2 numbers that go to the unit on the left, as you can see here, and 2 numbers that can go to the unit to the right, as we can see here. As you notice, even though damage is being spread to the unit on the right, since it wasn't actually being hit, nothing's going to spread back from this unit. And as with all these numbers added together, we get a total damage amount of 1.9 million damage, which is over double the initial hit. So definitely a very nice increase in damage there. I do have sort of a diagram here to try to better explain it. So pretty much, like if we assume that every enemy has 2 spreads, this requires a lot of setup, by the way. This is purely rhetorical. Achieving setups like this is pretty difficult to do realistically. But in the event where we did have this, right, if we use a single target ability on the middle guy, right, it's going to push 2 numbers to the left, push 2 numbers to the right, right? In this example, all the enemies have a 30% spread and a 20% spread, just for, ease of doing the math, right? So in this case, the first number is 30%, so we take 300,000, push to the left, push to the right. Then we have 20%, 200,000, push to the left, push to the right. Then we get a total of 2 million damage, which is about double of what we were doing to the single target. Then we have an AoE example where we have 3 million AoE, where we do 1 million for each target. So pretty much this is going to be kind of the same thing, right? We're going to take 30%, 300,000, 20%, 200,000, and push them to the other 2. Except each of the 3 hits is going to be doing this, which means that each enemy is going to be getting a 300,000 and a 200,000 from the other 2 enemies for 2 300,000s and 2 200,000s in total. Which means, and if you add all of these numbers up, you arrive at 6 million. So you notice that, between single target and AoE, in this scenario, they're both doubling the damage. And we'll kind of get into that further. I mean, obviously, do keep in mind when it comes to spread, right? There is going to be more RNG involved naturally, because you're going to need to get a nice, decently steady supply of Fawn's attack card to keep uptime on the debuff, right? So when it comes down to this, well, a spread Kato is typically easy to slot into a team. It's not, something that usually requires a lot of sacrifices to put in, right? The real question here is, now that spread is more viable, now that spread is something that can be easier to maintain, is it going to be worth to start, picking up Luminous Star Poppy off of the bench and placing her onto our teams? And when I think of a team that can take advantage of spread potentially the most, is Minotaura, just because she is primarily single target, but she does dabble into AoE. So if you're able to juggle spreads and spread multiple enemies, then she can actually benefit multiplicatively off of that due to her soul stabbing and due to her ultimate detonations, right? So these days, when it comes to Minotaura teams, 3 units that are considered core in this team comp at this point, assuming you have all of them, are Minotaura, Viola, and Fawn. Now, if you wanted to go a route where, you don't want to play Poppy, right, the usual default would be Arena, right? Just to buff the Minotaur, or to buff the Minotaur as much as possible, or if you want a little bit more consistency in your runs, you are always welcome to run Vanilla, right? But one thing we're going to potentially look at, I mean, do keep in mind, like I said before, right? Poppy is a combatant that requires a decent chunk of card usage. Minotaura, thankfully, because she gains SP so quickly in between ultimates, she doesn't actually have to use that many cards. Like when her ultimate's on cooldown, she only needs to use 2 cards. And if you pre-fire 1 card the turn before, she only needs to use 1 card. And with Fawn on your team with Viola, you can keep uptime on Viola's buff a lot easier, to the point where you only really need to use Viola's buff if you have really bad Fawn card RNG, or if you're looking to just funnel cards to Minnow, right? So then that begs the question, okay, well, how good of an option would Poppy be here, right? We can already run a spread Kato in Scholar Per. Granted, it's 18 versus 35% spread, but we can run a source of spread on this team without any sacrifices, right? So, what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks to running Poppy as the 4th slot on this team? You know, something that's going to require a bit more luck, perhaps something that's going to require a bit more foresight in regards to how we're going to sequence our cards, because we're going to want to make sure that we are getting, at least a second, maybe a third Poppy ultimate off throughout the course of the run, right? So how does Poppy compare? So what I went ahead and did in regards to this is I did run some tests, so that we could kind of take a look here, in a vacuum, and see how Poppy performs just strictly raw numbers wise versus other, 4th slot options that can be considered for this unit. Do keep in mind Stacy's not here. It's not fair to evaluate Stacy in a training environment just because she gains so much out of clan campaign. I could have tested it in clan campaign, but it is difficult to, be able to reserve a boss and sit on it and, just consistently be able to test hits like that. So I will be excluding Stacy. I did test Arena versus Stacy when I did a Fawn Minnow run, the one shot the white boss. Just keep in mind in clan campaign, Stacy will be about 5 to 10% better than Arena, assuming you keep uptime on Stacy's final damage increase card. Okay, now with that out of the way, we had 4 different teams basically. We have the control. We just put in a 4th unit that doesn't offer anything in terms of damage increase. We stuck Nanya in there. We have 6-star Poppy with activating her attack buff. If you didn't know, Poppy does have a card, a basic card that allows her to select an ally and increase its attack by 15% at 1 star. Of course, again, we are running Fawn on the team, so that isn't something we have to worry too much about reapplying, because Fawn can pretty much keep it up permanently, right? So we have Poppy with her attack buff, right? And we'll be doing some baseline damage versus one enemy, and then we'll see how things factor in with spread, right? We have 4-star Twin Shadows Triss because she does have a star up effect that increases counter damage. And then we have a 6-star Arena, right? Of course, these are both just passive buffers. Do keep in mind when you're playing Minotaura with just 3 very passive buffers, you do have a bit of room to activate additional cards, which could leave you to, have some inefficient uses of your card slots in some turns, like using Viola's debuff, which isn't that great, right? Maybe using some extra Fawn cards. Um, so do keep that in mind. So what we did here was we got, Minnow, Viola, Fawn, and then we put, the 4th units mentioned on the team. We went to the training mode against training bot, right? And we did 3 hits where we just did turn 1 Viola buff into soul stabbing. In the case with Poppy, we did Viola buff into Poppy buff into Soul Stabbing, right? No ult or anything like that. It's just a basic Soul Stabbing card on turn 1. We did 3 runs each, and we recorded the minimum and maximum amounts of damage. And then we took the averages of them, and we recorded the relative increase over the control. So as you can see here, the attack buff actually did pretty decently. I would imagine this is because my Minotaura has a lot of crit. We also do have, quite, and that crit damage is kind of exacerbated by Fawn's passive and by Viola's buff. My Minotaura is probably hitting over 550% crit damage after buffs and assists and stuff like that. So we definitely have a lot of crit damage. We have a lot of percent damage increase because of Fawn's passive, and then even more so when we activate Minotaur's ultimate. And we don't really have a lot of attack outside of the base attack and the attack percent that you get from reforging your UR gear. So I can see this, I can see why this did so well. It still does fall behind Arena though. Do keep that in mind. And once we do get into Minotaur's ultimate, she's going to start dealing Sunder damage, which means that crit damage that Arena provides with her passive is going to become doubly effective, which means that this gap will widen over time, right? So pretty much when you're fighting one target with Minnow, don't use Poppy. I mean, that much should have been obvious from the get-go, but Poppy is valued for her spread. There is no reason to use her if you are only fighting one enemy. Now, we kind of went a bit further. We have a couple of cases here. So as you can see here, we have our spread multiplier. It is assumed that in all of these cases, we have a 6-star Scholar per as our Kato. As we saw, that gives an 18% spread multiplier. Poppy's ult gives 35. And you know what? I realized that I mucked up the calculation here because this isn't 1.43. 18 plus 35, that would be 1.53. So let me go ahead and update that. So if we take a look at all of the numbers here, we will see that, in a lot of cases, as long as we are able to keep our spread up, Poppy is offering a much more notable damage increase, both for single target abilities and AoE abilities, with 1 and 2 enemies with spread applied in single target and AoE situations. Which means that generally speaking, right, on paper, as long as we can keep our spread up, Poppy's going to be best in slot for our 4th slot compared to the other options. Now, with this does come caveats, right? So, first of all, obviously, Poppy is going to be relatively demanding in terms of her card usage requirement. I don't think this is something that's deal-breaking for Minotaura specifically, but if you are looking at other potential comps to use the spread in, it could be a deal-breaker. For example, if you're looking at Asura Shiro, you typically want to use quite a few cards between them, primarily to stack Vuln and, to be able to chain out as many ultimates as you can. There's other teams like Black Tea that just simply don't have room, right? Because you need Black Tea, you need Fifi, you need Felicia, and then after that, Fawn's just going to be the best option. And then, Poppy isn't even worth it if you don't have Fawn, right? Because then we have the uptime issues from before. You could, I guess, consider it for like an AoE Minami Afros team. Minami Afros, Poppy Fawn. You do lose out on, that doesn't even work that well because you lack AoE debuff application. You kind of need Eleanor. So yeah, it's kind of hard to fit into a lot of teams, right? It's kind of why we're looking at Minotaura specifically. I'm kind of struggling to put my finger down on, I guess you could run it in Delilah, right? You could go Delilah, Garfire, Poppy, Fawn. That could work, right? And then yeah, it's just Delilah who needs the card usage, and typically you're only like if you have one carry, they only typically use upwards of 2 cards per turn. So that's something that you could keep up. Yeah. So I will say Delilah. This could be pretty good, right? And just to kind of visualize that comp here, right? That would be Delilah, Garfire, Poppy, and Fawn. I would say that due to the low card requirement of Garfire, her job is literally to apply Dark Lightning once, maybe twice the entire match. Um, you know, there's not a lot of card usage requirement besides Delilah, so Poppy does fit into here fairly well. But yeah, other than that, uh, as far as the Minotaura team is concerned, I still do think that Minotaura is the best user of Poppy for the time being. I guess you could also consider it in Selena, right? Selena, Viola, Poppy, Fawn. This comp works, right? Because Selena wants other units to activate their cards anyways because of her buff card to gain SP. Even though I don't think Selena's that great and I think Minotaura power crept her, if you have a Selena, hey, that's a great way to use her, right? But yeah, let's kind of go back here. So the main caveats is Poppy is going to demand some card usage. This is going to make her not super desirable in every team. Do keep in mind though, in the case where you can't run Poppy, you still have the Kato, right? So even though the spread isn't going to be as high, you're still going to be gaining quite a bit of damage from that compared to pretty much every other active Kato, which is generally worthless. The only other active Kato that's even worth mentioning, right, is the Baby Dino, just because it gives you 560 attack, right? But this is only 140 less attack, and you get 18% spread. So it's definitely way better if you have Fawn, right? The other problem is consistency, right? If you're going to play a Minotaur comp with Poppy and say Nightmare's Call, it's going to be very reset intensive because now on top of having to worry about Fawn passive uptime and having to worry about, getting enough Minotaur ultimate detonations, now you have to worry about maintaining spreads and you have to worry about Poppy's SP at the same time. So it's a lot of factors to juggle. And if you're somebody who's not experienced with piloting this comp, or maybe you're more of a novice to the game, it could definitely be something that feels overwhelming. So generally, what I say is Poppy worth picking up again? Has she gained value comparatively to where she was before? Yes, absolutely. Poppy is much better than she was before, and she will probably be the technical best in slot for various teams, as we've seen. The most notable is Minotaura, which is very prevalent because Minotaura is the strongest DPS in the game, right? But do keep in mind that there might be, some additional frustration with playing the team. There might be some additional caveats, but if you are leaderboard chasing and you are fighting more than one target, well, Poppy's going to be your best option in a lot of cases, especially since in leaderboarding, a lot of people just use Minnow anyways. Poppy is going to be a great option here. And unlike Minotaura and Fawn, who are Luminox characters who just drain your funds, Poppy's free. Well, Poppy's free as long as you have the advanced cores to buy her. But if you've been playing the game for long enough, you should have some standard characters maxed, or you should have some fodder cores for some less desirable standard characters that you can melt into those gold cores to at least get Poppy to 3 stars, right? Because I do think in order for Poppy to be playable to this extent, you do want her to be at least 3 stars because of the ultimate extension, right? You definitely want to be able to have that spread last for 2 turns as opposed to 1, so that you don't have to worry about it running out. You kind of get that turn of leeway because you're not going to get Fawn's debuff every single turn. That is a heavy ask, right? But yeah, so TLDR, spread is great again. It got bug fixed. Poppy's pretty good, but it is going to take more skill to pilot this double spread variant. And yeah, after being out for almost a week, yeah, Fawn's broken. So, like, if you have the pulls, right, I would definitely get her. I understand if you can't, because you blew everything on Minnow and the anniversary banner. Like I said, I think Minnow was still the better investment because Minnow can carry you no matter. Minnow can carry your account from any spot, right? Fawn's only going to carry your account if you already have good DPS characters to begin with. Minotaur is the good DPS to foundation your account off of. But, like I said, if you have pulls left over, definitely recommend getting the Fawn because especially if you already have Minnow, it's going to be a fantastic investment. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. My next video will likely be next week when Terra Simon likely releases. We're going to kind of be doing this deep dive again, except we're going to be doing a deep dive on Curse, which is something that I have not touched at all, ever since I started making these videos. Kind of excited for that because I am prepared for it. I've got 6-star Dorothy. Let me see here. I've got Trixie maxed. I've got, Yunkin maxed here. Still have to get their Pathos weapons up and stuff and get some full attack gear rolled. But should be pretty fun testing some Curse next week. Will Terra save Curse? Will Curse finally not be mediocre? Can it compete with Jin Kui for AoE and Red? We'll have to find out next week. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.